By the autumn of 1944, the war in Europe seemed to be nearing its end, at least on the surface. American forces had pushed across France with remarkable speed, liberated key cities, and were now staring directly at Germany's western frontier. But what looked like the final stretch of victory quickly transformed into one of the most brutal and punishing chapters of the conflict. Ahead stood an imposing line of fortifications, endless rows of dragon's teeth jutting from the earth, thick forests wired with hidden explosives, and concrete bunkers carved deep into the landscape. It was a place designed not just to slow an army but to grind it down. Early in the campaign, American units encountered only scattered resistance. Patrols moved cautiously through broken terrain, sometimes advancing miles before meeting serious opposition. This created a dangerous illusion, one that many soldiers would soon regret believing. Because once the German defenders reorganized, the quiet dissolved into chaos. Mortar fire erupted from unseen positions. Machine gun nests pinned down entire platoons. Fog-covered forests turned into deadly labyrinths where every step could trigger a mine, and every tree could conceal an ambush. What followed was not a swift march into Germany, but a grueling struggle fought hill by hill, bunker by bunker. It was a test of endurance, courage, and sheer willpower, one that pushed thousands of young Americans to their physical and emotional limits. Their stories, often overshadowed by larger battles, reveal the harsh reality of warfare at a moment when the end should have felt close, yet never seemed further away. If you want to explore more powerful, human stories from history, stories that bring the past to life, make sure to like this video, share it with others who love history, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach more people and keeps the journey going. As the American push toward Germany's western frontier gained momentum in the autumn of 1944, the sense of urgency within the ranks grew sharper with every mile. Soldiers who had crossed France with confidence now found themselves facing a landscape shaped entirely for defense. Yet the early days of the campaign had created a deceptive impression. The enemy seemed scattered, disorganized, even exhausted. Patrols moved steadily through forests broken by dragon's teeth and winding trenches. And although the terrain itself demanded caution, it did not immediately convey the level of resistance that was gathering just beyond the mist. This fragile illusion lingered long enough to set the stage for a dramatic shift in the tempo of battle. Among the units forging ahead was V Corps, commanded by General J. Lawton Collins, a leader known for his ability to move quickly and strike decisively. Collins coordinated his armored divisions and infantry with precision, pushing them through the first belt of German defenses in a swift, measured thrust. Tanks rumbled forward to crush obstacles and draw fire, while infantry followed closely, clearing bunkers and forcing back scattered pockets of German soldiers who seemed unable to mount a cohesive step. It was a moment that hinted at possibilities. Perhaps the line would crumble fully, and the road into Germany would finally open. But war has a way of shifting course just when certainty begins to form, and the men of V Corps soon felt that shift with full force. The rapid drive they had begun required massive amounts of fuel, ammunition, and logistical support, and the Allied advance across France had already stretched supply routes to their limit. What the soldiers on the front lines could not see was the intense debate unfolding within Allied command, where resources were being reallocated to support a very different gamble Operation Market Garden. This ambitious plan aimed to seize a chain of bridges through the Netherlands and create a direct corridor into northern Germany, a bold strike that demanded trucks, fuel, and manpower on a massive scale. As the convoys and supply trains were redirected northward, the impact on the V Corps became painfully clear. Vehicles that had been roaring forward now sputtered and stalled. Tanks sat immobile under the grey sky, their crews waiting for fuel that never arrived. Artillery batteries rationed shells, firing only when absolutely necessary, while infantry units found themselves pausing more often than advancing. The momentum that had carried them through the first defensive layer slowed until it nearly stopped, leaving soldiers exposed and uneasy in a region where silence never felt reassuring. Collins understood better than anyone how dangerous this stagnation could become. Every hour spent waiting gave the German defenders time to reorganize, reinforce, and exploit the rugged terrain they knew so well. The forests around the American positions thickened into shadows, and with each passing day, signs of renewed German activity grew more apparent. Patrols reported fresh fortifications, new trenches, and the unmistakable sound of enemy armor moving deeper in the woods. What had once been a promising breakthrough was now transforming into a test of endurance. As the enemy regained the time they needed to turn their defensive network into a formidable barrier, the soldiers felt the weight of the shift even more intensely. The pause dulled the edge of their initial confidence and replaced it with the uneasy awareness that the next phase of battle would be nothing like the first. They could sense the storm gathering beyond the quiet tree line, and they knew that when the attack resumed, the fight waiting for them would be harsher, more deliberate, and far more dangerous than the early days had suggested. In the growing stillness, the men of V Corps braced themselves, understanding that the true struggle for Germany's frontier was only beginning. As V Corps waited in the shadow of the German frontier, stalled by the shortage that had drained their momentum, the enemy was undergoing its own transformation. The scattered resistance the Americans had first encountered was giving way to something far more organized and determined. Field Marshal Walter Model, known among his own troops as a commander who thrived in desperate situations, took charge of the defense with a relentless focus. Under his direction, German units that had been retreating in disorder now began to form coherent lines once more, drawing strength from reinforcements and from the formidable defensive terrain that surrounded them. The lull in the American advance became the opening Model needed, and he moved swiftly to reshape the battle on his terms. The shift became most visible around the ancient city of Aachen, a place steeped in history and symbolic meaning for Germany. Its narrow streets, old stone buildings, and fortified outskirts made it a natural stronghold, and as American forces approached, it became clear that the Germans intended to hold it at any cost. The city was not just another objective on a map. It was the first major German city the Allies would attempt to seize, a psychological turning point as much as a strategic one. As units positioned themselves along the surrounding hills and villages, the sense of anticipation deepened. Soldiers felt the weight of the moment, knowing that what happened here would echo far beyond the city walls. Encirclement began slowly, shaped by the terrain and the stubborn opposition that resisted every approach. American infantry pushed through woods and farmland pitted with bunkers and machine gun nests, while artillery pounded defensive strongpoints that seemed to regenerate almost as quickly as they were destroyed. Tank crews advanced cautiously, weaving through narrow approaches where every corner might conceal a hidden threat. The closer the troops drew to Aachen, the more fiercely the defenders fought, determined to show that the war was far from over. The earlier illusion of a crumbling German line had vanished entirely. In its place stood an enemy that refused to yield. When the Americans finally entered the outskirts of the city, they found themselves drawn into a kind of warfare many had never experienced. Street by street, building by building, the urban landscape became a maze of rubble, shattered glass, and sudden danger. Snipers waited in upper floors, firing through cracks in broken walls. Small German teams maneuvered through basements and alleyways, striking quickly before disappearing again. Houses that had once sheltered families were now fortified firing positions, and every advance required careful coordination between infantry, engineers, and armor. Progress came at a high price, measured not in miles but in the relentless effort needed to secure each block. The fighting dragged on with a grim intensity that tested both sides. American commanders knew the city had to fall, yet they also understood that forcing the issue too quickly would lead to even greater losses. The Germans, guided by Model's belief in rigid defense, held on until further resistance became futile. As the circle tightened and the remaining defenders were pushed into a shrinking pocket, the outcome became inevitable. After days of exhausting combat, Aachen finally fell, its streets quieting under American control. The victory sent a ripple of significance across the front. It was more than the capture of a city, it was proof that the long-awaited entry into Germany had begun in earnest. Soldiers who had endured the brutal fighting could sense that the campaign was shifting again, this time in their favor, yet the cost made clear that every step forward would demand extraordinary resolve. The fall of Aachen was both a milestone and a warning of the battles still waiting beyond the horizon. With Aachen behind them and the front beginning to open into the heart of Germany, Allied planners faced the challenge of securing their flanks to prevent a sudden counterattack that could undo the hard-won progress. To the east lay the dense, foreboding expanse of the Hürtgen Forest, a labyrinth of twisted trees, thick underbrush, and narrow ravines that seemed almost to conspire against any advancing force. Commanders, seeking to maintain the momentum after Aachen, ordered the 9th Infantry Division into this natural stronghold, unaware or perhaps underestimating the extreme difficulty they were about to encounter. Soon, the 28th Infantry Division would be called upon to reinforce the operation. But the situation had already begun to strain the resolve of every soldier involved. From the outset, the forest proved a merciless adversary. Unlike the relatively open approaches around Aachen, the trees here formed a dense canopy that blotted out sunlight and restricted visibility, turning each step forward into a tense, uncertain endeavor. Mines, hidden in the mud and leaf litter, waited silently to claim the unwary, while pillboxes and fortified positions carved into the terrain offered the Germans near-perfect defensive advantages. Every clearing could conceal a trap, every ridge a hidden gunner. Progress that might have taken hours on open ground stretched into days, measured in yards rather than miles, as soldiers fought not only an enemy determined to hold their ground but also a landscape that seemed as hostile as the men they faced. The early optimism that had accompanied the fall of Aachen quickly gave way to a grim reality. Supply lines struggled to keep pace with the advancing troops, and the coordination that had served the Allies well in urban combat faltered among the trees. Artillery, often essential for softening enemy positions, was difficult to deploy effectively amid the tangled undergrowth, and air support offered limited advantage when the canopy obscured targets and restricted lines of fire. Communication between units became erratic, leaving isolated pockets of men vulnerable to counterattacks, while the constant stress of the forest environment eroded morale. Exhaustion, fear, and the relentless pressure of unseen dangers created a tension that weighed heavily on both soldiers and commanders alike. Casualties mounted at a harrowing rate, each loss a reminder of the unforgiving nature of the operation. Men were wounded not only by enemy fire but also by the treacherous conditions, slips in muddy ravines, accidental detonations of mines, and the hidden hazards of fallen trees and debris. Commanders faced agonizing decisions, balancing the need to advance against the ever-growing cost in lives, knowing that the forest did not yield easily to even the most disciplined efforts. Reinforcements, including the 28th Infantry Division, were brought in with the hope of maintaining the offensive. Yet they too became entangled in the same deadly rhythm, confronting the combination of natural obstacles and fortified positions that made progress agonizingly slow and painfully costly. Despite the mounting losses, the soldiers pressed forward with an unwavering sense of duty, their determination fueled by the broader mission of breaking into Germany and ultimately ending the war. Each captured position, no matter how small, represented a hard-fought victory against both the enemy and the forest itself, while each setback underscored the brutal reality of combat in such unforgiving terrain. The Hürtgen Forest became more than a mere obstacle. It was a crucible that tested the limits of endurance, courage, and leadership. shaping the experiences of those who passed through its shadow. The story of the 9th and 28th Infantry Divisions in the forest would be remembered not only for the ferocity of the fighting, but also for the extraordinary resilience of the men who faced an enemy that was as much the terrain as it was the soldiers on the other side. After weeks of grinding through the suffocating maze of the Hürtgen Forest, the 28th Infantry Division finally glimpsed a glimmer of success when Schmidt, a small yet strategically vital town nestled along the forest's edge, fell briefly into their hands. For a fleeting moment, the weary soldiers allowed themselves to believe that their relentless struggle had yielded a tangible reward, that the endless days of navigating mines, tangled roots, and hidden pillboxes had culminated in a victory they could hold. The town's streets, scarred by shellfire and strewn with debris, offered a grim tableau of the costs already paid. Yet within those streets lay hope that the Allies could secure a foothold and press further into German defenses. However, this hope was quickly tempered by the stark realities of warfare, particularly in a theatre as unforgiving as the Hürtgen. German forces, under the experienced eye of commanders who had fortified every conceivable advantage, mounted a swift and brutal counterattack. Panzers, the fearsome armored spearheads of the German army, rolled into positions that American planners had deemed temporarily secure, their appearance transforming the momentary victory into a desperate fight for survival. The soldiers of the 28th Division, exhausted by days of near-constant engagement and deprived of the usual reinforcements due to stretched supply lines, faced a cascade of challenges that tested both their discipline and resilience. Communication lines, already strained by the dense forest canopy and the chaos of battle, faltered at critical moments, leaving units isolated and unable to coordinate effectively against the sudden German surge. Orders issued from higher command, while well-intentioned, often failed to reflect the realities on the ground. Unrealistic expectations of rapid advancement collided harshly with the limitations imposed by terrain, weather, and dwindling resources, creating confusion and frustration among both officers and enlisted men. The soldiers were caught between the pressing demand to hold their ground and the inexorable force of the German counterattack, a tension that magnified the psychological strain of an already harrowing campaign. The forest itself seemed to conspire against them. Mud slowed movement, shell-cratered roads impeded vehicle support, and every fallen tree or ravine became a potential death trap, forcing men to fight not only the enemy but the landscape itself. As hours turned into days, the initial gains in Schmidt eroded under relentless pressure. Positions once held with pride became precarious, and despite fierce resistance, the 28th Division was compelled to relinquish most of the territory they had captured. The counterattack revealed the grim interplay of factors that had plagued the campaign from the beginning. Stretched supply lines that left men hungry and low on ammunition, disrupted communications that hindered coordination, and command decisions that, though grounded in strategy, struggled to account for the brutal unpredictability of combat in such unforgiving terrain. Soldiers who had endured the horrors of the forest felt the bitter sting of losing hard-won ground, a reminder that victory in war was never guaranteed and often came at a staggering cost. Yet even amid this setback, the courage and tenacity of the men remained evident. Small acts of heroism, individual stands against overwhelming odds, and the dogged determination to regroup and continue fighting underscored the resilience that defined the Hürtgen campaign. The brief capture and subsequent loss of Schmidt became emblematic of the broader struggle, a testament to both the ferocity of German resistance and the extraordinary endurance of the American soldiers who faced the dual challenge of a determined enemy and a forest that was as lethal as any opposing force. In the end, Schmidt stood not only as a contested objective but also as a symbol of the grueling, unpredictable, and profoundly human experience of battle on the Western Front. As the bitter winter tightened its grip over the battered landscapes of the Western Front, the human cost of the Hürtgen Forest campaign became increasingly apparent. American soldiers, already exhausted from days of relentless fighting, now faced a new adversary: the harsh, unrelenting elements. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes, trench foot made every step agony, and the psychological strain of constant danger pushed many to the brink of breakdown. Combat fatigue seeped into every unit, eroding cohesion and morale, and even the most seasoned veterans struggled to maintain focus amid the chaos. The grim reality of war was laid bare in stark moments such as the execution of Private Eddie Slovic, whose fate cast a long shadow over the troops and highlighted the desperate measures taken to enforce discipline under extreme conditions. Such events underscored the fragility of morale in a conflict that spared no one, testing not only physical endurance but also the resilience of the human spirit. Yet, amid the darkness, glimmers of humanity and compassion endured, offering brief reprieves from the relentless suffering. On the cold trail, for example, soldiers from opposing sides occasionally observed temporary truces, allowing the evacuation of the wounded from no man's land. These fleeting acts of mercy reminded men that, even in the midst of the most harrowing battles, empathy could still shine through. Letters home, small gestures of kindness between comrades, and shared stories of pre-war life all provided slivers of hope, anchoring soldiers to the memory of a world beyond the forest's lethal confines. These moments, though brief, forged bonds and offered emotional sustenance that was as vital as any ammunition or supply. By the time the Hürtgen Forest campaign finally drew to a close, the toll on the American forces was immense. Lives had been lost, bodies scarred, and minds tested in ways few could have imagined before entering the fray. Yet, even amid such profound adversity, the courage, endurance, and fleeting moments of humanity displayed by the soldiers became a testament to the unbreakable spirit of those who fought. The forest, with its mines, pillboxes, and icy dirt, had tested them to the utmost limit, but their perseverance would stand as a lasting symbol of resilience in the annals of history. Thank you for following this story of valor, struggle, and humanity in one of World War I's most grueling campaigns. If you found this journey through history insightful and engaging, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell to explore more compelling stories from the past. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows us to continue sharing the extraordinary experiences of those who shaped history.